Welcome to the National Newspaper Publicists Association's Let It Be Known. Today we confront the uncomfortable truths that continue to shape America in 2023.
Plainly put, this shooting was racially motivated and he hated black people.
60 years since the March on Washington and Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s iconic I Have a Dream speech, yet the echoes of racial prejudice still reverberate through our society. Recent events remind us that the battle for racial justice is far from over as we grapple with the persistent specter of racism that lingers on our doorstep. In a nation that claims to aspire to unity and equality, the tragic racially motivated shooting at a Dollar General in Jacksonville, Florida has again left us grieving and wondering about King's elusive dream. 3 precious lives lost to the sinister grip of hatred. Let's be clear. This is not an isolated incident. It is a painful reminder that racism's insidious presence still taints our world, and it must be addressed with urgency and resolve. As we navigate the complexities of contemporary politics, we witness public figures, including political candidates like Ron DeSantis, Vivek Ramaswamy, and the ever divisive Donald Trump, exploiting fear and resentment to stoke the fires of hate. Beyond the headlines, we are confronted with more subtle forms of discrimination, the censoring of voices through book bans, targeting Black authors and authors of color, aims to rewrite history and silence narratives that challenges the status quo. Meanwhile, educational institutions once intended to enlighten and empower are becoming battlegrounds for racial equality as we witness school libraries, like in places like Texas, being transformed into disciplined halls disproportionately for students of color. And then the disbelief that anyone could still claim that the brutal legacy of slavery somehow benefited Black Americans. Such statements only underscore the need for comprehensive education and dialogue to dispel myths and confront the truth head on. The sobering reality remains that the fight against racism is not a task for the faint of heart. It is a collective responsibility that we must all shoulder. Today, we will speak with noted activist Rodney Hurst about the history of racial violence in Florida and throughout the nation. First, let's bring on the one and only Barrington Salmon as we go to today's headlines. Barrington, good morning. You're on mute. You know, your fans want to hear your voice. They don't want any lip syncing going on.
Good morning. How are you? Oh, I can lip sync really well.
Oh, is that right?
If you say certain words, if I say certain words, they'll know what I said.
Yeah, I got that. Absolutely. Absolutely. Barrington, you know, today, let's start here. This Republican presidential candidate, Vivek Ramaswamy, after performing his rendition of Eminem's Lose Yourself at the Iowa State Fair, Ramaswamy has been asked by the real Slim Shady to stand down. They informed that guy, Ramaswamy, however you want to say his name, Ramaswamy. No, you can't use Eminem's music. This has been something that's been going on. Like Trump has gotten cease and desist as well. Others have gotten it, but more notably, you know, in Vivek's case, I mean, he is so closely aligning himself with Donald Trump, and now you have the same results as far as the musicians are concerned. And Eminem like stepped right up and said, "Nope, this can't happen."
But the thing that we're looking at, all of the seven dwarfs plus one, they're all auditioning to become vice president.
Right.
None of them are running. I think only Chris Christie is the one that's really serious about trying to run for president. This dude, every cycle, every political cycle, at certain points in America's political history, you always have a clown who looks like us that they put out there to say the most egregious the most racist, the most odious things to justify the Republican racism that is so much a part of everything it does. So you have the Clarence Thomases, the Candace Owenses, the what's that dude, Ice Cube, and all these people, Steve Harvey, people who are in prominent places who become apologists for these racist SOBs. So he's yeah, he came to prominence because Don Lemon was fired behind
Yep.
the argument that they had,
Yep.
because he told all these lies,
Yep.
and Don Lemon was correcting him, and it became this big thing. So the most recent thing that I think he said this weekend was that Representative Ayanna
Yep.
Presley and Dr. Kendi, Ibrahim Kendi, are like modern day versions of the KKK. Now,
He compared
in
her Presley to the Grand Wizard. Well, and this guy, he's the son of Hindi
yeah,
immigrants. He, brown skinned,
very wealthy,
and
very wealthy,
I think
grew up in a had a very
hmm
privileged background, and now he's trying to act like he's one of the bros in the hood.
yeah, and so you mentioned Clarence Thomas and all those folks, um, which is especially egregious. But when you see something like this is and I did a commentary for about Vivek for Black Press of America, and you see folks like this, Barrington. And I say folks like this, I'm talking about immigrants. I'm talking about
Mm,
children of immigrants. Um, this country has obviously has just this ugly history with
yeah,
us African Americans, um, and they haven't been too kind to others either. But they've allowed others to have what they
yeah,
won't allow us
mhm,
to have, right? And so when you see these other quote unquote minority groups latch on to these far right wing ideals, and does that especially I mean, is that as bad as it is with Clarence Thomas or Candace Owens or Steve Harvey? I mean, how does that move you, Barrington, to see someone come in who they don't otherwise have any use
yeah.
for? I mean, like you said, he's wealthy. They have
But the
use for
thing for
that.
me, I don't put it in a different category. A traitor is a traitor. These are race traitors, and one of the things that we have to remember, you know, I have lived in this country for more than 4 decades, and I still have people asking me, why don't I speak like an American? Whatever that is, I don't know what that is. So the narrative, the national narrative, is a melting pot where you come in and you're supposed to just melt and blend with everybody else. Vivek Ramaswamy needs to understand that if he goes to parts of Oregon or Mississippi or some other places like that, they'll string his ass up and not think twice about it because he a brown skinned man and he is the enemy. And what Ron DeSantis has done,
See, and that's
what
where I was going.
Ron
Yeah,
DeSantis has done,
that's what. Yeah.
Ron DeSantis and the Greg Abbotts and all of those clowns, those dangerous clowns, is they have weaponized race to the point that you have a little, I won't say what I was going to say, like that dude in Jacksonville that killed them, a useless waste of space who for some reason thinks that he's better than black people, that he's superior to black people, probably was still living in his mother's basement, probably couldn't find a job. But everything that happens to
Mhm.
these people, they blame black people. So at the end of the day, bruh, for me, as a Pan-Africanist, there's no difference between African Americans and Africans in the diaspora. Because if I don't open my mouth,
Right.
they don't know that I'm any different from an African American. And the same treatment. I have been denied jobs. I have been called a nigger. All of the things that African Americans, or most of the things, or some of the things that have been visited on African Americans have been visited on me. And my coming from a foreign country didn't make a difference. So the sooner, the thing is that we have to have the integrity to decide that we're not going to become pawns for these people. Because I don't know who that woman was in Jacksonville when DeSantis was there talking about, you gonna let the man speak because he gave him $1 million for HBCU. They should have run that dude out of town. He shouldn't have been allowed to speak. They should have told him that he is not welcome there.
So now to our special guest, activist Rodney Hurst. Hey, Rodney.
How are you?
Good to see you.
Good being with you.
How are you, sir?
So Rodney, let's just jump right into it. In the light of these events in Jacksonville, we got a lot to cover. Let's just start there. We know white supremacists targeted Black individuals and took innocent lives. How do you see the echoes of historical racial violence still resonating in today's society?
Well, Jacksonville has done nothing to deter its racism, its racial violence over the years, going back to the 1960 sit-ins when I led the sit-in demonstrations, and after 2 weeks we were attacked by 200 whites with axe handles and baseball bats.
Sure.
What is happening today in Jacksonville and in Florida is helped by a governor whose racism dribbles throughout the state into the South, but certainly in the state where he has much more political power, obviously. And when you have that fertile ground, that racist ground, then anyone can come in and do some things because they feel like what they do or what they can do is because it is allowed, it is advocated for, and it's part of the order of the day. 21-year-old racist shooter decides to kill some niggers, going to an HBCU first. That kind of radicalization is no different than the Dylan Roof who sat in Emmanuel AME Church for an hour with a Glock in his pocket and then killed 9 worshipers. Except you can see in a state like Florida, where the governor has basically said, we have no respect for Black folk and we insult Black folk daily. If you don't believe that, watch me, and then begins to talk about slavery being beneficial to Black folk and that Black slavery was like a training program and Blacks earned some skills from slavery that they were able to take somewhere. The same demented mind that would kill Black history, that would kill Black history books, that same kind of mind would kill Black people.
Yeah.
And that's what you have here in Florida. Florida is not isolated, it's not an exception. But racism is so invasive and evasive and pervasive in this country until everyone throws their hand up. All white folk, white American Christian white folk, throw their hands up and say, oh no, not me, you know, we would never do anything like that. Yet they don't open their mouths when you're dealing with issues like this. So we need to understand what racism is. The unfortunate thing is in this integration generation, many of our young people don't understand what racism is. They don't understand that they are still identifiable by the color of their skin. They don't understand, like Dick Gregory says, white is not a color, white is an attitude. And that's what we have to deal with in this country.
Yeah, absolutely. So Rodney, the influence you talked, I think you articulated it very well there. But just sticking to Governor DeSantis for a moment, when you have the influence of such a divisive political figure, particularly one and with such power, how can we, as a society, counter the spread of hate speech and the rhetoric that is so pervasive, and it perpetuates this racial animosity?
Well, the thing that we have to understand in the struggle, uh, and I don't want to not give the seriousness of the situation its due, but nothing that is happening today is new.
Mm-hmm.
I've been around the sun 79 times. When you live through the assassination of Martin Luther King, of Harry T. Moore, of Medgar Evers, the wanton killing of the 4 young Black girls in Birmingham, the 2 young men who were killed that same day, George Jackson, Herbert Lee. When you live through that, when you live through segregation, when you live through the signs, the disrespect and insults, which are cornerstones of racism, you understand that you had to fight through that to get to this point. The problem with dealing with racism is that Black folk cannot solve racism. I cannot end racism. Only white folk can end racism. I can only fight it. So along the road, the journey that we follow to fight white American Christian racism, if white folk or some white folk don't become allies, and we have no choice but to fight it again. It's just like what's happening in the schools with the pronouncements out of a racist governor, which basically say that we aren't going to teach Black history and we're going to ban books. Maybe it was never their responsibility. Well, it wasn't. It was not their responsibility to teach Black history anyway. We allowed and we thought with our Christian thinking, and I am a Christian, but we thought with our Christian thinking that white folk were going to would do the right things when it comes to teaching that they should have done all along as so-called professional educators, and they did not, and they have not, and they will not.
But Rodney, we're paying our tax dollars for them to teach us. So they do have a social and other type of responsibility to give us some requisite return.
We've paid taxes all of this time, and they have not done it. You know, idealistically, that is what you say. You're my governor, I pay your salary, but yet he still flits around the country spouting his verbiage, his jargon of racism. We pay their taxes, state representatives, state senators, yet they tell us you aren't going to teach certain things about Black history. You aren't going to have books in the classroom, in the libraries about Black history. All of my books have been banned because they tell the truth about Black history, American history, and civil rights history. Idealistically, you always want to say that it is your responsibility to be a governor, to be a mayor, to be an elected official of all the people. But realistically, that does not happen. And it has never happened when it comes to white folk and racism. They are always going to do what they want to do because they have the numbers and they have the control, which is what racism is.
So we can't expect them. So what you're saying, what I'm gathering right there is that we expect them to do this, we expect them to do that. We really can't expect them to do anything that's beneficial for us.
True.
Well, when you think about it,
so where does that leave us?
When you think about it, what has been done that has been beneficial for us that did not revolve around voting or the kind of leverage that required them to do it? We passed the Civil Rights Bill 64, Voting Rights Act 65, and 1968. And before the ink was dry, the print ink was dry on the bills. We have dismantled a lot of what was done with those two bills with the Supreme Court that is initiating all eras of segregation and racism with a 6-person majority. None of what we're talking about now revolves around the realism of what racism is. We're talking about idealistically what an elected official or other should be doing. In America, that has never happened.
But if that's,
and I never expect white elected officials to do things that are right because they are the right thing to do. They always need to be motivated to do it.
But if that's the case, then we really should be talking about separation, or actually dismantling all the bullshit institutions and rebuild them in a way that it benefits us.
Well, the question is to what degree we become a part of America and make America include us as that part, as they did not do in the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence. What part of America do we continue to think, as James Weldon Johnson wrote and Lift Every Voice, in saying that there is some hope for them and to allow us to march on to victory is one. The reason we are where we are today, and because we are dealing with this issue today, and because we're dealing with murders and death, is because of racism. And it's because of the negativity that comes out of white elected officials. White elected officials with 4 years of a racist president has sowed the ground that we are having to deal with right now. It was already there. Yeah. He just helped bring it out. As far as separation, that's always a choice. It was tried before, obviously, with Marcus Garvey. We have a constant fight to achieve the citizenship that was never intended for us in this country. The 15 million plus Black Africans who were kidnapped and brought to this soil, there was never an intent for us to be American citizens, because in some instances they did not have a choice. Then what we have done for the last 158 years is make America respond to some of the things that it idealistically wanted to happen for white property owners.
So where does that leave us?
So we can.
Where does that leave us?
That leaves us still fighting. That leaves us still voting to change elected officials. That leaves us voting for presidents who can get it right. That leaves us to registering Black folk to vote, to elect elected officials. And the reason why they come up with voter suppression, they change the voting rolls, they understand the rules of the game because they made them. We're the ones who are not understanding the rules of the game. And we've got to make folk understand that nothing is going to happen for you based on the color of your skin until you make sure it happens. And one of the reasons you make sure it happens is that you have to show white folk especially that there are strength in numbers.
Yeah. The thing that annoyed me most of all was, like, they shouldn't have let DeSantis come to Jacksonville and say shit. They shouldn't have let him come there. They should have run him out of town. Because nothing that he said is true. Nothing that he said is sincere. And he just gave them announced $1 million that he's going to give on HBCU. That's monkey money.
Which is pittance, especially when you're talking about security. He showed up at a prayer vigil the same day we had the 63rd commemoration of Axe Handle Saturday, and the 1960 sit-ins. We had a number of people, we had several people who spoke at the commemoration who left going to this prayer vigil out of respect for the 3 persons killed.
Yeah.
When they told me we're going to the prayer vigil, we'll be back, president of NAACP going to the prayer vigil, we'll come back, Minister Rodney going to the prayer vigil, we'll be back. They had no idea that Ron DeSantis was going to be there. This was a photo op.
Yeah.
So after he got there, and after they got there, and he said what made his comments, and he was then booed by black folk who were there. Then a black female elected official defended him.
Yeah. Yeah.
Reverend Freddie Haynes calls black folk like that bent back Negroes.
Mm. So, and that's part, isn't that still part of the problem? And also, you know, I'm listening to this conversation and we're talking about they and they still have this. The Constitution still states this: neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except as a punishment for crime whereof the party shall have been duly convicted, shall exist within the United States. Except that it should not be still in 2023 in the language of the U.S. Constitution, and still five states, I believe, still have slavery in their state constitutions. So it seems like you said, you got the Voting Rights Act passed, the Civil Rights Act in the 60s. But for every gain, there's not only setbacks, but there are reminders like that. The Constitution still says slavery and involuntary servitude, except as, you know, it's still telling you that, yes, we still accept slavery. We still acknowledge that there can be slavery. And obviously, mass incarceration is just another form of slavery.
Yeah.
And so what do we do? That's the question. What do? We keep throwing out, I know, and this is not to knock anybody who goes to the ballot. That's what they choose to do. But black folks turned out in 2020 in record numbers, right? They continue to do their jobs. Black women particularly continue to do what we're told are their jobs, and that is to get that right candidate, the Democratic candidate, over the hump. But where is the reward? Where is because the ultimate reward, right, would be the end of having to talk about this every day.
But even someone like Joe Biden, they keep on giving us the excuse that he's an institutionalist. There are mechanisms that are available to him to add members to the Supreme Court. He says he doesn't want to do that. They have some white boy kills some Asian women, like 5-6 Asian women in Atlanta, and their attacks in New York and elsewhere. They get legislation passed. We get Juneteenth. So we ain't demanding anything. Because I remember the Saturday that Biden had his speech, he said that black people are the reason that he was voted in as president and he wouldn't forget them. But it seems like he forgot them the day after he was elected, after he was put in office, because he certainly hasn't pushed legislation and other mechanisms to support the African American agenda that he has done for LGBTQ, for Asians, and for others. And it's our fault, because if we can't sleep and if we can't live free, he's not supposed to sleep neither. None of them supposed to sleep until we get what we want.
Well, I don't defend any white elected official, and I certainly don't expect them to deal with problems the way I would when black elected officials come to my side of town and they come to talk to me or whatever. I tell them there are several things that you've got to be first. First of all, you cannot be an expert on me. That's number one. Secondly, you don't know all of the problems of the black community. Then you've got to listen to me. I will tell you the problem. I'll tell you some of the things that I have to deal with as a black person.
Yeah.
And then you have to listen when black folk tell you some things, and then you have to be fair. A lot of black elected officials don't do that if they campaign in the black community at all. Whatever a president president does, whatever a governor does, whatever a mayor does, because we are so accustomed to getting nothing. Even when we get something, we act as if that is a time of joy. I'm always reminded of the saying that if you are accustomed to privilege, then equality feels like oppression.
Yeah.
So whenever white folks still have to learn how to get it right, and we always have to stay on the case. Now, whenever we get tired of staying on the case, then we have to then acknowledge to ourselves that American democracy does not work for us. And then we either have to decide that our lifestyle will change altogether within this enclave of racism, or we've got to leave this country. The question is, where do you go? Do you stay here and fight here? Or do you go someplace else? And are you going to someplace that is even worse? Certainly not better than where you are. But that's a dilemma that Black folk can, when you understand after 300 years of being enslaved and in chains, and obviously you know this, but when you release me and tell me I'm free, and you give me no money, no property, no clothes, no animals, no food, yet for every enslaver that lost an enslaved person at the end of the war between an enemy government, the Confederacy, and the United States of America, they lost, and you still gave each of those enslavers reparations for each of the enslaved persons that they lost. You gave me nothing. Even today, safety net in the early 1930s that excluded as a olive leaf to the Southern legislators. You excluded domestic workers, and you excluded farm workers, and 65% of Blacks in this country were either farm workers or domestic workers. So that safety net that would have helped us in terms of retirement was not available to us until the late 1950s, as was GI Bills that we could not get, and other things that were not available to us. So it has always been that kind of an uphill struggle. And today is no different. What's happening today is some people are beginning to see what racism is for the first time, because they were lulled to sleep by decades of an integration society which only tolerated Black folk.
And Black people are still tolerating them. They're still tolerating them.
And that's not going to change until we're no longer identifiable by the color of our skin. We have to understand that and continue to fight for who we are and for what we get.
Well, you know, Stacey and I have talked about it, because I was born in London. My parents are Jamaican, and large numbers of my friends and associates have either left to go elsewhere, or they're preparing to do so, because, you know, some folks have options, some folks build options. And I mean, one of the conversations I have with my African American friends a lot of times, they say we were born here, we ain't going nowhere. And I understand that. Everybody can't leave. But I just honestly get frustrated, because we are so fractured. We don't have a unified front. Dr. Naim Akbar, who was a friend and mentor, he always said that most of the older people, they're burnt bushes, they're not changing. If you're going to really effect change, you have to focus on the young people. And I agree with that.
Yeah, and along with that, Rodney, what is, you've been in the struggle a long time. What's your message? What possible message of hope can you convey to and it's, you know, the up and coming activists, if you will?
Well, I can only deal with what happened to me when, as a preteen and a teenager, I walked around dealing with the insults of separate but equal and the colored and white water fountains and waiting rooms and lunch counters and bus stations. I started school when I was 5 and I got skipped. So I'm always 2 years chronological age behind my class, but still those questions were there. And in my 8th grade American history class, I met a school teacher named Rutledge Pearson, who told us, among other things, that the American history book that was approved for Negro students, the vernacular at that time, that only had the name of George Washington Carver and Booker T. Washington in that book, written by racist white authors and white historians. Leave that book at home, because he did not want us to learn American history from their slanted and racist viewpoints. So he taught us an inclusive American history featuring some of the blacks that would never have been in those books. Then he would say to the class, freedom is not free. If you're not a part of the solution, then you are a part of the problem. And he encouraged us then to join the Youth Council NAACP, which I did at age 11. Later, at age 15, I became president, and at 16, still as president, I led the sit-in demonstrations. We saw segregation as part of a problem that we needed to fight as Black folk in this country. I was blessed during my lifetime to meet some of the absolute greats, both through the NAACP and through the work we were doing in Jacksonville. And it's a heady experience to meet a Jackie Robinson and a Thurgood Marshall and a Constance Baker Motley and a Roy Wilkins before you graduate from high school, and to sit and have conversations with them. Your life is never the same when you're fighting civil rights and you understand what their fights are and some of the stories that they can tell you, that Thurgood Marshall could tell you, that could literally curl your hair. But they fought and brought us to that point. If I called the name Charles Hamilton Houston, a lot of Black folk would not know, a lot of white folk wouldn't know who he was.
And now with the ban in the books, many won't know, right?
Right, will not know. So if we don't start teaching our young people about our history, then they're never going to know. And my 4th book that I recently wrote is called Black and Brilliant. And I wrote that book so that young Black, it's designed for young adults age 12 to 18, dealing with who they are and who their ancestors are and what they did and how they accomplished in spite of being marginalized, and how some of their accomplishments was as a result of a racist world, a racist America, who certainly did not want them here, did not want them to accomplish anything. And that's what you have to keep in front of young Black folk, that no matter the odds, there are certain things that you can do. And I am never one to say, if you eat your Wheaties and eat your spinach and grow up and do the right things, then just will be your reward today. No, that's BS. You have to understand first what racism is, understand your Blackness, understand that Black image looking back at you in the mirror, and then you have to fight. And it's unfortunate that Black folk have to fight for citizenship rights in this country. But if you're going to stay, and if you feel like there is a place for you to stay in this country, then if you understand that white folk are afraid that they're going to be in the minority in another 30 years, then they're going to fight to do whatever they can to preserve their majority, and they're going to keep you from being in the majority. So you have to do what you do and what you can do to let young Black folk understand nobody gave you anything and that your ancestors fought on whose shoulders you are standing, and you have to keep on fighting yourself. So that's my message to them.
Yeah. The good thing, Stacy, is that Black people in Florida, as Rodney will attest, they're not sitting down waiting, because I've been reading and hearing about folks who are doing Saturday schools, who have put together alternative schools, and they are
freedom schools.
Freedom schools.
Yeah.
So a son of a like DeSantis can do what he does, but we have to always find ways to counter it. And that's what gives me hope, because I don't believe that this country will ever change. I don't think that it will ever be, unless we're the ones in control. It ain't never going to be anything for us. And we, so for me, it's always been about creating viable spaces for us within the structure, within the institutions, within society, because they it's clear that they ain't giving you nothing. I don't really want anything. I just want to be left the hell alone and be allowed to live my life and take care of my children and make a living. That's all I want. I don't goddamn want anything else from these people, right? But they always are acting as if we're taking something from them,
right?
Which is a zero-sum bullshit that they teach us in this country. If Stacy gets $1, that means it's $1 less for me, and that's crap. It's foolishness. But so many people embrace that thing. So I didn't expect. I grew up in London, and London is the birthplace of all of this. They brought it here in the 1600s, but they're very polite in their racism. So I've been fighting for my whole life, and I suspect I'll be fighting until I die, and I'm cool with that.
Right. That's right.
Well, Rodney, before we let you go, Asala is coming to Florida.
Yes.
What's the goal of the upcoming Asala gathering in Florida?
Well, among other things, Asala sets the theme for Black History Month and for the year, and the theme this year is Black Resistance. So obviously, with what's happening and what happened in Jacksonville, we'll talk about Black Resistance. Next year, the theme will be Black Art. But Asala brings a history to any community that it comes to, with the varied speakers and the information, the resources, the materials, the presentations that they have. They come talking about Black history. One of the things that when I talk to folk, I say to them, white folk and Black folk in the educational arena talk about teaching Black history as if it is something that we do and that we do it well. We don't teach Black history anywhere well in this country. Not at elementary schools, middle schools, high schools, colleges, and universities. I've dealt with college students and graduate students. It was pitiful, really pitiful and sad how little they knew about Black history. So that's a void that Asala brings to town, to a community. They are here for 5 days, 150 different sessions. And hopefully those persons who attend, those persons from Jacksonville, when they hear some of the things in Asala, they will certainly, I feel, learn more or know more when Asala leaves than they did before they get here, before Asala came. And that is still part of the mission. Asala brings education and knowledge and materials that Black folk can internalize. When you understand that in 1926, Dr. Carter G. Woodson felt it necessary to start a Negro History Week. 1926, almost 100 years later, we are dealing with some of the same issues today that he had to deal with when he decided to start Negro History Week. So that shows you, and I don't use the word progress, especially when it comes to race relations, because progress assumes that something good has been happening, and that is not the case when it comes to Black human dignity and respect in this country. So Asala will come to town, Asala will bring a message, Asala will bring messengers, Asala will bring some ideas, Asala will bring some concepts. We'll talk about freedom schools. I don't know if a lot of folk outside of the state of Florida know this, but teachers in public school teachers in colleges and universities, faculties in colleges and universities are intimidated.
Yeah.
High school teachers have to have all of their books vetted by media specialists. Even the books that they have in their classroom for references have to be vetted first by media specialists. If by chance a white parent comes into their classroom and they see a book that they feel shouldn't be there, or the book might not have been vetted by the media specialists, and they are reported, that teacher can be charged with a Class 3 felony.
Yeah.
It's amazing. Isn't that something?
The insidiousness of that is that that also means that there are portions of the Bible, there are portions of William Shakespeare, there are portions of all of the classics that can be banned out of the classrooms. So what is incumbent upon us outside of public schools and colleges and universities is to make sure that our young Black folk understand who they are and understand their Black history. And that is a mission that we should have undertaken a long time ago. We didn't do it. Now we've been told that that's one of your missions today.
Yeah.
Wow. Well,
because the craziness, Stacy, and I've said it before, is there any place in the world where somebody who's been oppressed allows the oppressor to educate your children?
Right. That's right. That's
Is
right.
there anywhere else in the world? What do we expect?
Right. You're right.
What do we expect? So
right.
In one real interesting sense, DeSantis might be doing us a favor, because what passed for education was bullshit. It wasn't anything of consequence or meaningful or consequential or significant for us. All education is doing is helping you to become a cog in the American wheel. It's not teaching you true freedom. And I consider myself fortunate because I sat at the feet of Naeem Akbar, Dr. Joseph Benjocanan, right? Bobby Wright, all of these fabulous, Asa Hilliard, all of these fabulous scholars. And that was just God putting me in the right place, because most of the Black people at Florida State and Florida A&M, they weren't exposed to these scholars, to these giants. Right. And they fancy themselves to be highbrowed educational institutions, but they're highbrowed educational institutions teaching whiteness and teaching white-centric history.
Well, Rodney, we appreciate you dropping in on us today. It's a great conversation, and we'll keep checking in on what's going on down there in Florida. Thank you so much for joining us.
It's always an honor being with you. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Take care.